Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. We shall be discussing one editorial and two columns today. The rest of the newspaper you can skip, not relevant for your examination. Let's look at editorial number one, between word and intent. The Parliament of India has not been functioning properly if you look at the recently concluded monsoon session. Why is it not functioning properly? There is ruckus inside the parliament, there is indiscipline, and this leads to frequent adjournments. The primary objective of parliament, which is the supreme law-making body in this country, is to pass bills, is to make laws. Now, some of these bills have not been passed. Some of these bills have been passed without discussion, and majority of these bills have been passed without being sent to standing committees or select committees. Recently, the Chief Justice of India, he ruled the fact that Parliament is not engaging in a healthy debate. The bills are being passed in a rush, and because of that, there is a lot of ambiguity in these laws passed by the Parliament as well. This ambiguity could have been resolved if these bills are sent to standing committees or select committees, or these bills are also referred for public opinion. Let's look at this law which was passed recently by the Parliament, Tribunals Reforms Act, something that we discussed yesterday as well. There are provisions in this act which were struck down by the judiciary previously. So these provisions that are part of this law, similar provisions were struck down by the judiciary in the past. Yet the same provisions have been included in this Tribunals Reforms Act. If there was a proper discussion in the Parliament, members of the Parliament would have raised this issue, would have flagged this concern that why are there these provisions in the law, because previously the court has struck down these provisions as unconstitutional. So Parliament not functioning effectively. One, what is the drawback? What is the disadvantage? It leads to the passage of laws which are ambiguous and sometimes which are also violative of the orders of the verdicts given by the honorable courts. One more thing, tomorrow on these bills, if there is a dispute, who is the final arbiter in this country? The judiciary, the Supreme Court of India? Chief Justice of India says that if the laws are ambiguous, if there is a dispute on one particular law, we may go back to Parliament. We may look at the debate that was going on in the Parliament when such a bill was passed, so that we can understand the intent of the legislature. And by understanding the intent of the legislature, we can be in a position to give the order and resolve the dispute. But the problem is that since Parliament is not effectively functioning, there is a lack of proper debate and discussion inside the Parliament. That means tomorrow when there is a dispute on a particular law, we may not get the benefit of these discussions inside the Parliament. That means we may not know the real intent of the legislature behind these laws. One more example, when 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act was passed and this was challenged in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court took away the power of the states to identify socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. Despite the fact that government vehemently presented its case before the court saying this is not the intent of the Parliament. The Parliament does not want the states to be deprived of this power of identifying socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. That is why this editorial says important pieces of legislation. For example, in the recently concluded monsoon session, Lok Sabha passed 14 bills. And do you know how much time on an average was spent on each bill? Less than 10 minutes. So this editorial says that important pieces of legislation should be scrutinized by these standing committees, and we should involve wider public opinion, the civil society as well, to give their inputs on important pieces of legislation, because ultimately these laws are for the betterment of the society. These laws will have ramifications for the entire society. So long story short, Parliament is not functioning properly because there is ruckus, indiscipline, frequent adjournments, and the bills that are being passed in the Parliament, some are not passed, some are passed without any discussion. The average time being spent on these bills is less than 10 minutes. and ultimately we are not utilizing the expertise of our standing committees and select committees while scrutinizing important pieces of legislation. If there is a good, proper, healthy debate inside the parliament on important bills, important issues, tomorrow when these matters reach the court will have the wisdom of these parliamentary debates. The courts will be in a position to understand the intention of the parliament behind passing these laws, and it would be easier for the judiciary to resolve such disputes. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper editorial. Now let's look at another column, a report that is at odds with access to knowledge. Let me give you a hypothetical example. We have publishing houses, for example, the books that you read for civil services examination. Who are the publishers? Tata McGraw-Hill, Orient Black Swan, so on and so forth. Let's assume tomorrow they approach me that please you write a book on Indian polity. Why? Because the expectation is if I write this book, more and more civil services aspirants will buy this book. Ultimately, it will be profitable for these publishing houses. And ultimately, this profit they can use to pay other writers as well, other authors as well. And ultimately, the literary tradition in India would be expanded. Simply put, publishing houses, they approach the authors, writers, please write the book. And we will pay you for writing this book. Not only for writing this book, this proceeds of sales, the number of sales that we will achieve by publishing your book, we will also pay you royalty. And when you buy these books, you pay the money, and ultimately these publishing houses are benefited and they will pocket some of this profit, but the rest of the profit they will invest again. They will hire more authors and writers. That means more and more books are being published, and ultimately more and more literary offerings are provided to the people. Now imagine a situation. Instead of you buying my book, what if you approach a photocopy shop, a Xerox shop, and ultimately this photocopy shop owner is providing you the Xerox copy of my book. That means I will not be paid royalty. That means these publishing houses will also be at loss. And ultimately no new literary offerings will be provided, which basically means that this Xerox material will have a negative impact on our literary traditions as well. That is why we have a copyright on these materials. Copyrighted materials, they are subject to intellectual property. Now what is a copyright? Copyright is a legal right, and this legal right grants the creator of any work the exclusive right to use, to distribute, to reproduce, to have the control. There was a photocopy shop, Rameshwari, inside Delhi University, and this photocopy shop was providing course pack to the students of Delhi University. What is this course pack? Let's say, for example, I am a student of Delhi University and I have to study one part called agrarian sociology. The syllabi tells me that in order to understand this subject, I have to go through, let's say, 33 books. Now, as a student, is it possible for me to buy these 33 books? Because some of these books are very expensive as well. Then this Rameshwari photocopy shop, what he did, he took the important points, important pages, important chapters from these 33 books, did the Xerox of all these important documents and provided these in the form of course pack to the students. That means here this photocopy shop owner, he is not only Xeroxing one particular book, he is Xeroxing the important chapters of almost 33 books, collating them together and creating this course pack and selling this course pack to the students. Rameshwari photocopy shop owner said, if I would not do this, then it would take plenty of months for students to collect readings from different books, and at the same time it is going to be very expensive for the students as well. I'm just making life easier, studies easier for the students by providing this course pack. But then the publishing houses, for example, Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, others, they filed a petition before the Delhi High Court saying this is the violation of Indian Copyright Act, which means this photocopy shop owner, according to the petition, is violating the Indian Copyright Act by providing these course pack to the students by xeroxing, by photocopying important chapters from these different books of different publishing houses. Case was filed against Rameshwari Photocopy Shop. Case was filed against Delhi University as well, because inside the premises of Delhi University, this Rameshwari Photocopy Shop was there. Now, students also approached the court, and some of the authors who wrote these books, they also approached the courts saying, no, we should allow this course pack to continue. And they cited Section 52, Clause 1, Clause A of this Indian Copyright Act. Because it is this clause which allows for fair use of copyrighted material. What is this fair use of copyright material? For example, I can use this copyright material for my research. I can use this copyright material for my private study as well. If I'm a teacher, I can use the copyrighted material to prepare my class lectures. And the teacher is not only an individual, the teacher is the whole educational institution. In this case, Delhi University. That means Delhi University has the right to use the copyrighted material in fair use. And students also can use this copyrighted material if they have to answer the questions in the examination. That means, although yes, these publishing houses, they have the copyright over these books. That means without their permission, you cannot use, distribute, or misuse this copyrighted material. But we can still use these books under Section 52, Clause 1, Clause A of Indian Copyright Act if it is in fair use. Fair use in the sense, as a student, I am getting these Xerox copies of these books, but I'm not monetarily profiting from them. It's not that I'm selling this Xerox copies in exchange of some money. I'm using this material, copyrighted material, to write answer to the questions that are asked in the examination. Similarly, a teacher. The teacher is getting the Xerox material, but he is not selling the Xerox material to others. He is using the Xerox material, this copyrighted material, to prepare lectures for his students, to conduct research as well. So all this is done in fair use. Because this copyrighted material can also be expensive, and for a researcher, for a student, for a teacher, it may not be possible to buy this copyrighted material. 2012, the Delhi High Court imposed temporary injunction, in a sense asking the Rameshwari Photocopy Shop not to go ahead and sell these course packs. But September 2016, the Delhi High Court dismissed this petition. A single judge bench of the Delhi High Court dismissed this petition of various publishing houses. The Delhi High Court said copyright, especially in literary works, is not a divine right that confers on authors absolute ownership of their creations. The single judge of the Delhi High Court said this literary work can be copied, can be Xeroxed, not only inside an educational institution, but outside of an educational institution as well, in the interest of fair use. But now, few months later, in December 2016, the division bench of the Delhi High Court, 2 judges of the Delhi High Court, they decided, no, this lawsuit should continue. We will decide whether this is allowed or not allowed. But then in the year 2017, these publishing houses, they withdrew this petition, and ultimately the matter came to the rest. Then what is this column all about? This column is related to a report published by Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce. This report basically asked the government of the day that you should amend this Section 52 of Indian Copyright Act. And you should allow such copying, such Xerox, only in government-owned institutions. And there should also be a limit on copying, on how much copying is permissible. Not only Xerox, if you are converting these copyright materials in the form of PDF, in the form of digital formats, we will have to regulate this as well, because if it is not regulated, it will impact these publishing houses, and ultimately it does not augur well for the overall literary culture and image of the country. And this basically criticizing this Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce report. Why? Number one, fair use is very important, and fair use also has a very important link to right to education, which is a fundamental right under Article 21 capital A of the Constitution. So we should not tinker with the fair use provision of the Indian Copyright Act. Number one. Number two, despite this fair use provision, if you look at the market share of these publishing houses, people still buy their books. Those who can afford these books, they still buy these books. That means despite the Xerox material available in the market, it has not negatively impacted the market share of these publishing houses. So why tinker with this Copyright Act? That is what you need to understand from this newspaper column. Now let's look at another column, Remembering the Horrors of Partition. There is another column written in today's Indian Express newspaper on the same topic by Mr. Shyam Saran, who was a foreign secretary in the government of India. An event, big event, a historical event ought to be remembered. Some do, some don't. For example, Holocaust, which was the genocide of European Jews during the Second World War by the Nazi Germany. The world remembers this Holocaust. Similarly, Japan remembers the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That means some countries, some societies, they do remember these historical events, but some don't. For example, United States, it does not publicly commemorate the genocide of the Native Americans during the 18th and 19th centuries. India too, till this year, cared not to collectively remember the horrors of the partition, when estimated 2 million Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims died and millions were displaced. Now the government has decided that we will mark 14th of August every year Partition Horrors Remembrance Day. But why? Why do we remember events? We remember events, number one, to apologize. For example, British apologized for the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. That means we remember because it's the journey of remembrance that seeks forgiveness. That means we remember events to apologize. If one community has committed atrocity on another community, then we remember that event. That remembrance is primarily a journey that seeks forgiveness. One community apologizing to another community and seeking forgiveness, so that the community against which the atrocities have been committed, they can move on with their lives. And we remember events to also prevent the recurrence of such events. That means by remembering that event, we proclaim never again. This is not going to happen again in our lives. But today's The Hindu newspaper, as well as the Indian Express article written by Mr. Shyam Saran, they allege that this is not the right approach to remember a catastrophic event. Why? Prime Minister, while announcing the Partition Horrors Remembrance Day, these writers allege that the Prime Minister did not mention a community. But they allege that since the date has been chosen as 14th of August, which is the Independence Day celebrated by Pakistan, according to these authors, it clearly spells out that we shall remember the atrocities on only Hindus and Sikhs. These are not my words, these are the words of these authors who have written these columns in Indian Express and the Hindu. So these authors, what they allege that this kind of remembrance will reopen the wounds. They won't heal the wounds. They will only reopen these wounds. Previously, we did nothing to remember the horrors of partition. Why? Maybe because we wanted to avoid talking about mass killings. This decision, according to the authors, will keep the past on boil. And the authors say that this is not remembrance. It basically encourages these wounds to fester. Number two, they say the horrors of partition did not start and end with August 14, 1947. But they happened over a period of time, even before August 14, after August 14 as well. Then what should we do? Should we not remember the horrors of partition? There is a solution. What is the solution? That all the three countries come together. Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. Let there be talks and let them decide a date. And this date should be commemorated as the Partition Horrors Remembrance Day, so that the citizens of all the three countries can come together, commemorate a single day so that all the citizens of these three countries, they can come together and take a pledge, take a vow that never again shall we allow the recurrence of such horrors. Now let's look at the practice questions. 2 questions for today. Number 1, remembrances of mass killings and collective violence can play an important part in societies seeking forgiveness for the crimes they committed against humanity and resolving that they will never let those terrible events happen again. Comment. Question number 2, it is vital that important pieces of legislation are scrutinized by standing committees, which will have the advantage not only of eliciting replies from the executive, but also inputs from the wider civil society before the statute is framed. Justify. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great evening.